Hello, welcome. In this brief video, I would like to say a few things about some of the background information to the book of Daniel. I always think it's really important if you're getting into a text, especially a text you've never engaged with, but even if we're talking about a fictional text, non-fictional, religious, legal, historical, philosophical text, no matter whatever kind of text you have, and you're going to engage in a deep study, you're going to interrogate the text, so we speak sometimes. It's always good to have some of the background information down. So I'm going to discuss four background informational items with you that I think will help you kind of navigate your journey into the book of Daniel. The first thing I want to speak to is the issue of the historical context. The historical context from the opening of chapter 1, the book of Daniel, it's a narrative that's set against the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and it begins in 605 BC with the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II. Now in the text it just says Nebuchadnezzar, but it's Nebuchadnezzar II. And it begins with the first of several deportations of young Judeans from Judea, the land of Israel, southern Israel, Judea, into Babylon. Daniel, of course, and his companions being one of that grouping in the deportation of these Judeans. Keep in mind in the context that the Babylonians are aiming to really re-educate the conquered youth. They're setting out to, in a way, re-identify them or change their very identity. In the other video there, Pastor John talked about that, and you see that with the name changes. So, for example, they go from Hebrew names like Daniel, Hananiah. We say Hananiah, but it's Hananiah, to Mishael, and their names then are changed to Babylonian names. Now, the Hebrew names reflect, of course, aspects of the God of Israel, the Hebrew God Yahweh, and we see that their names then are changed to names that honor the Babylonian deities, in particular the god of the chief god of the Babylonians, Marduk. So kind of keep that in mind. The other kind of historical item that I think is important is the destruction of the temple. Now in 586, so 605, when Nebuchadnezzar comes to the throne, just a short period of time after some series of deportations, the temple, Solomon's temple, the temple in Jerusalem in 586 was destroyed, razed. Now, this is no small matter. In the minds of the Judeans, this is absolutely earth-shattering. This wasn't just a trivial geopolitical event, but it had massive repercussions, and it really marked their thinking, and it marked their spiritual identity as well, if you want to say that. The idea behind this here is two things. If the temple was understood to be God's footstool, right, the place where heaven and earth came together, the place on earth where the creator of the universe, right, would make his footstool. If that was in some sense destroyed, then that would suggest that maybe the Babylonian gods, like Marduk, are more powerful. And you might think of the entirety of the book of Daniel could be read as a set of stories, think of as a literary rebuttal to that idea. The other item that I would quickly point out too is, in the minds of the Judeans, they have this idea, or had this idea, that the temple was indestructible. It was completely inconceivable to think that the temple, the Jerusalem temple, would be defiled, much less razed and destroyed. That was just inconceivable. So when that took place in 586, that really radically impacted them. In fact, you see, later we'll talk more about that even the language to describe those earth-shattering, inconceivable events take on the genre style of writing called apocalyptic. It's that dramatic. But anyway, let's move on. The second point of consideration is the book of Daniel, in terms of its writing style. It's categorized in the Hebrew canon as wisdom literature. In our Bibles, in the Christian canon, we have it, the book of Daniel, with the prophets. But in the Hebrew Bible, they categorize Daniel in the section of their Bible called the writings. The Hebrew Bible goes by the acronym, the Hebrew Tanakh, and the first section is the Torah, the second section is called the prophets, the Nevi'im, and the last part, called the writings, is called the Ketuvim. And in the Hebrew Bible, that's where they put Daniel. Daniel is considered wisdom literature, and Daniel and his the narrative and his life, Daniel, instead of giving oracles of judgment to the nations or to Israel in exile, he rather is considered giving wisdom literature to the Hebrew people on how to live in a pagan land, how to live under the thumb of a pagan ruler. Daniel is showing how this can be done. So anyway, if you encounter that, Daniel is wisdom literature from a Hebrew point of view. Third, in the in the book of Daniel, you'll find that there are two languages. Daniel's written in Hebrew and also Aramaic. Well, there's a lot of debate about why, but just know this. The first chapter opens up with Hebrew. So the first chapter is in Hebrew, and it goes all the way into chapter 2, verse 4. And then it shifts to Aramaic, and it stays in the Aramaic all the way through chapter 6, and then switches back over to Hebrew. We, in this video, won't get into why that's the case, but just know that sometimes the difference between Hebrew and Aramaic, think of Hebrew as the official kind of like the liturgical language. It is the kind of official language that was used in synagogue, that has to do with worship and with the scribes and how they did and conducted the synagogue services. Okay, so it's a very formal language that really wasn't spoken. It was a dead language by the time you get to the first century. So, but Aramaic is a cousin language. It originates in Syria, but Aramaic is a cousin language, and that is what's called the lingua franca. It's the language of the people, and it is the common tongue that's spoken in Babylon. It's also the common language that was spoken in the first century, and it's the common language that our Lord Jesus Christ spoke. But anyway, Aramaic and Hebrew, they're kind of sister languages. If you want maybe to help you kind of cogitate that, think here, if you have a Catholic background, or if you know anything about Catholicism, it's not uncommon to, let's say, go to a Catholic Mass. In the Catholic Mass, people speak the common language like English, right? If you're in the English-speaking community. But it's not uncommon for the services in the Mass to be spoken and conducted in Latin, the official language of the liturgical practices of the Roman Catholic Church. So Keep that in mind, if that made any sense to you. Okay. Fourth and final here, the structure of Daniel. Daniel, in the structure of Daniel, think of Daniel's arranged with chapters 1 through 6 are what are called court tales. C-O-U-R-T, court tales. And then chapters 7 through the remainder of the book then become visions. And the court tales are in third person. They're written in third person, describing, again, the pagan gods and the pagan courts kind of surrounding the people of God, in this case, Daniel and his 3 friends. And you're kind of driven to this drama of, how is this going to work out? Is God going to vindicate his people? Okay, when you jump to chapter 7, on chapter 7 to the remainder of the book, you have a series then of first-person visions, Daniel's visions, then that are described from the first-person point of view. Okay, well, that's all I want to say. I probably went off and said more than I need to, but I think if you hold on to these kind of anchor points, when you take the plunge into the book of Daniel, it will make, I hope, a little more sense to you with that in mind. Okay, well, thank you, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.